So, the thing I find quite sad with some of these countries, and you can put it in the side, I'll try and look at the Southern states in a bit, is this. I always say to some of these people, when you have African elites, if you let them have everything they want, your capital city will look like Dubai, but the rest of the country will look like Somalia. Basically, Nigeria should be the hegemon who brings the states together and says, we should tackle this problem. I've got the biggest economy, I've got the biggest army, I can lead. That isn't what we're seeing. What we're seeing is every 10 days, there's going to be a massacre in Nigeria. There was even one yesterday.
Start or kind of whatever you want to talk about. And Dave jumped the gun, but okay. Yeah, wherever you want to start off from.
Sure. So thank you for having me back on your show.
Always great to have you, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart Bolus here. So even though there's a lot going on in the world right now, the situation in West Africa and the Sahel in particular, I think is something that needs attention. Basically, I think the best way to start this is very recently, what's left of ECOWAS, which is all of West Africa, barring Burkina, Niger, and Mali, who left, they have stood up a 2,000 strong force to battle against jihadism in the region. And I was speaking to Gavin about this earlier in the week, about how this is completely insufficient, because when you read the small print, it basically says each country will send their own little contingent. It's not clear how many, but if you've got 2,000 people in 12 countries, we're talking less than 200 people per country, and each contingent will stay in its own country. So it's a bit unclear about how they're going to be doing this, and it makes me realize how they're not working with the Sahelian countries who are fighting this. And then that brought me into the fact that ECOWAS just seems to be completely incompetent in doing anything. How are the Sahelian countries actually doing? And looking at their, not just militarily, but their economic performance, it's a sobering situation. I think we can honestly say all of them economically are, not in the best place. I think Mali has basically been surviving a sort of economic embargo by the jihadists. Being a landlocked country, they have to import, and they import things that have to come over by land. And the jihadists basically said, you know what, we're just going to raid all the motorways going into the capital city, especially when it comes to oil supplies, which has created a very difficult situation for them. Burkina Faso, as we know, at least half the country is basically lost to jihadists. And even in Niger recently, they had a massive attack on their main airport, which basically opened the eyes of many people, say that junta as well is not really in control of their security situation. And so I guess where I'm going to open this conversation up, and happy for you to come in, is how successful have these guys actually been? All of them have actually been in control for a number of years now. How much have they actually done in fighting jihadists? How are they managing their country's economies, and what does the future look like? And all I can say is, looking at it, it doesn't look peachy.
I would tend to agree. When that attack happened on the airport in Niger, that was, speaking of sobering, that was kind of a sobering moment for me because I lived there. I use that airport very frequently. I remember those roads or that road going from the city to the airport, those neighborhoods. And that facility, which used to be a U.S. military facility before we were told to leave, and was a French military facility before that, that's the most secure military facility in the country by far. Like, it's not even close. That's the most secure, fortified facility in the entire country. And if you can attack that at will, and it was a fairly complex attack, there are indications that drones were used fairly heavily in the assault.
Yeah.
And there are very serious concerns because of the amounts of uranium ore that are currently present at that facility,
Yeah.
that the Nigerian government is desperately trying to sell. There's just a lot that was, oh, things are not good. And
Yeah.
Niger, I mean, in the case of Niger, that's the most recent of the sort of three juntas that we're talking about in Mali and Burkina and Niger. And again, the track record is just, if you look at it economically, in dire straits, not a lot of foreign investment, to put it mildly, and struggling, absolutely struggling with the security situation, trying to implement policies that, to my eyes, look very similar to what has been tried in Burkina in terms of mobilizing the population. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me. I don't think you will. Those policies haven't worked in Burkina, and I don't
No,
think they're going to work in Niger.
no, I know, but yes, there is like a citizens militia which Ibrahim
Mm,
Traore of Burkina Faso set up, but you haven't heard any like major success stories from that, and I'm sure there's like a lot of failures from it which you don't hear about.
mm,
I just want to bring you both to attention of two anecdotes like from this region. One that was on the BBC is that in Ivory Coast, which borders Burkina Faso, they are hosting about 80,000 Burkina Bay refugees, which,
mm,
is a number I was actually a little shocked it's that high, who live in the villages in the northern region because they've been attacked by the jihadis. And they interviewed one woman who said, she had like four children when she was married, and she's lost everything because the jihadis came and killed her husband, and she said she ran to the bush when they came, and when she came back to her village, they were in the process of executing her final child. Yeah, it's pretty horrific stuff. And after that, obviously, she and other villagers fled to Ivory Coast. But she basically said she's been in Ivory Coast about 2, 3 years, and it's like
mm.
I don't, she can't go back because she's like I don't have anything to go back to. And so when I see a lot of the kind of propaganda online about Drawaway, about he's doing so amazing, I mean, you read stories like this and you're like, I'm sorry, this country is a war zone. And I think, a lot of people saying he's doing so well, they're just talking about, I don't know, Ouagadougou, the capital, and these policies he's putting out. I don't think he is like deliberately trying to undermine the country or anything. But the reality is, for many people outside of the cities, it's basically a wild west. There isn't anyone helping you. And even in Mali, I remember reading another anecdote of a woman who lived near Timbuktu, and she said,
I think I saw
back
this.
when the Islamists came in like 2012, which is kind of when it really started in this region.
Mm,
Yeah, her husband and her eldest child were killed in that attack, and then she had two younger sons, and she escaped and raised them, and then they came back, and then they both defected to the jihadists like 10 years later, both her sons,
mm.
because of money. So
Yeah.
they're joining an organization which killed their own father and their elder sibling because of economic situation. I mean, it is. I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, you're staring at situations where these juntas can talk this big game, bring in the Russians and say, oh, we're going to sort this out. It's very clear, and I like Gavin or you, Dave, to pick me up on this, but it's just bringing in foreign military mercenaries, be it French, be it Russian, neither could actually solve this problem. Just having, I mean, if French even had many more people than the Russians had, and I even think they had much more support because, Russian military is occupied elsewhere, literally occupied elsewhere. You just can't beat this without the economic consideration. Because if you're really
Mm.
having people willing to join purely so they can have an income, you are never going to beat this.
No, and just to kind of jump on that same, I guess, note that you were talking about earlier, Stuart, Burkina Faso has had the most terrorist attacks in the world outside of Syria since 2021.
Yeah.
And if they have an unstable security situation going on in the country, they're not going to be able to develop an economy. It's going to be impossible for them to get any sort of investment. It's going to be impossible for locals to actually go out and say, okay, today I'm going to go and work and I'm going to try and make some money and save some of that money or invest some of that money. Everybody's living hand to mouth in the whole entire country. And it's virtually impossible for them to get some sort of stability if they can't even have people that have some semblance of an everyday normal life. And I think that similarly in Mali, you had, was it in October, November, where it was essentially surrounded, right? The capital of Mali was
Yeah.
essentially surrounded,
Yeah,
and it was
Bamako.
Bamako was essentially surrounded by terrorists, and it was going to be
Mm.
virtually impossible for them to get fuel into the country or get fuel into the capital.
Well,
So,
and that's a
so
bit of a
that
that's a bit of a mystery. We'll get back to that in a
yeah, but
second.
so you have something like that too, where locally the country does not have access to fuel. How can they run an economy?
Mm. Yeah, I think the answer is the economy they have is quite shady about how they're
Yeah,
making money. Because
Yeah.
reading some reports, the Malian government they pay the Russians to have their troops there. They have never missed a payment. No once. The African governments are well known for like they'll say they'll pay you. It turns up late. Mali's always paying on time, and it's partly because of the mines they have.
Mm.
Because essentially, if your economy is I mine gold or any other precious resource and I sell it, that's hard cash and I can just pay you. So they do have that, but how many locals are in this economy? Not that many. So it's what do other people do? In the rural areas, they farm, but you can't farm if every few weeks someone's going to turn up and burn down your house and your village. So I think you're finding in many of these countries that the economy essentially only really exists in urban areas. And in the rural areas, it's just, well, you know, there's a trade and barter system. Because
Yeah.
also it's just any kind of local quote unquote bank or anything like that. It's so easily just going to be raided. So yeah, it's a bit unclear about really what the governance situation is in these rural areas. I think it's non-existent in a lot of it. And when you realize that ECOWAS as well don't have any plan of like how to really work with these countries, even though these Sahelian states have thrown off like Western sort of help and gone to the Russians. As I said, it's not working. It's not only that; it's they need to have people in who actually can teach their armies about proper counter insurgency operations. Because when the French were there, if I was to tell you some of the stories that were coming out of the quote unquote training they were given, it's laughable. I mean, to be brutally honest, what you read is they were giving the soldiers PE lessons mostly because I think it's because when they came, they were told you have to train the troops, but internally the French were just saying we'll do the bare minimum to say we've done it, right? And it's just we'll do some PE lessons. They do some training maneuvers, but the soldiers are given sticks and told pretend they're
Yeah.
guns,
hmm
and then they do a few maneuvers. They learn how to halt and all that kind of stuff. All right, great, you train them, but when they when they face these people in the field and bullets are flying around, yeah, they're not very effective. Lo and behold, who would be if that was the training you had?
But I mean, again, I heard a lot of the same stories, but I would also be told, particularly by Nigerians, that it was deliberate.
Yes.
And in Niger, but it was deliberately because the French didn't trust local troops. And they wouldn't, I mean, you told the story about the sticks. I remember being told a story where they said, well, they wouldn't distribute grenades. When they were showing them how to throw a grenade, they would hand them rubber grenades because there was just no level of trust. There was trust with the officers. They trusted the officer corps. They didn't trust anyone in the infantry, anyone who'd been drafted. And the training, consequently, was pretty much non existent because there was always a sense that if there was an attempt to throw them out, they didn't want to have to fight people who knew what they were doing, which is just a kind of insane logic, but that was very much how things worked back in the day. But the things we're I think both hearing now, it doesn't really sound like the Russian training is much of an improvement.
No. It's very clear from what I've read in like the Africa report on various other media. They don't like working with the local soldiers either, and it's just a case of they're getting paid sometimes 10 times what the locals are getting paid. They basically see them as cannon fodder,
Yeah.
and it's why would I really waste any of my time training these people because it's not my interest. I also read that now that the Africa Corps has taken over from Wagner Group, even though they're the
Mm.
same people, it was a different entity. Wagner Group, they say under Prigozhin, he was the old leader before Putin took him out in the skies. they had a much more active kind of mentality. So they will go out there and try and fight jihadists.
Mm.
And even though the Malian government, where they were mostly based, really liked that, that also meant that sometimes they would go take out a cell of jihadists, find out that some of these jihadists came from a local town, turn up in that town and cause mayhem because they will just go, oh well, you're clearly supporting these people. When realistically, if a few men are from a town, it doesn't mean the whole town is complicit. So there was quite a few stories of some, like atrocities being committed in these towns. You don't hear that so much now because the Russian troops now rarely leave their base. They're getting instructions from back home in Moscow, but it means that they sit in their bases. So that when sometimes these airports get attacked, because the airport in Mali was attacked, I think, last year as well, you regularly hear, I think in Niger too, that the Russians take an hour or two will pass before they'll join in the battle.
Yeah.
Because they're sitting there, they call Moscow and say, this is what's going on, what are our orders, rather than you should just go out and fight the enemy, right? And that obviously, when that happens, the local soldiers and the Russians do not have great relations because they go, well, we were fighting these people, where were you? So I think it doesn't bode well, frankly, for what's going on.
So we've been talking about ECOWAS, we've been talking about the Sahelian states. I know, fortunately or unfortunately, when audiences in the West have been hearing about West Africa over the last 6 months, the country that keeps coming up is Nigeria. In all of this, Nigeria does play, I think, a very important role. What do you see? Because we've talked about Nigeria extensively. I mean, really, where do you see Nigeria going from where it is now?
Well,
Yeah.
is for your listeners, right? Nigeria is the biggest, well, in terms of population at least, is
Yeah.
the biggest country in West Africa. I think it's actually the most populous country in Africa. 1 in 5 Africans is a Nigerian, right? You find them everywhere. And they have an acute problem with jihadism and insurgency inside their country. Donald Trump is aware of that as well, which would be why he did his Christmas present bombing of Nigeria on the 25th of December 2025. Basically, Nigeria should be the hegemon who brings the states together and says, we should tackle this problem. I've got the biggest economy, I've got the biggest army, I can lead. That isn't what we're seeing. What we're seeing is every 10 days, there's going to be a massacre in Nigeria. There was even one yesterday in another town. Jihadists are basically turning up, burning down, slaughtering villages all over the north of the country. And they're even appearing in areas that they didn't used to appear before. The army will usually turn up hours late after everything's happened. People are incandescent with rage, but there's no one around. And the situation is, as they can't manage the situation inside their borders at all, there's no leadership from them. There's no point. I mean, if you were to say to someone, "Help me defeat this problem," how are you defeating it? And you realize it's chaos inside there. And you go, "Well, okay, I guess you can't lead." But they are the only country who can, because they don't listen to anyone else. But their military isn't what it used to be. Men are not well trained, very bad morale, not paid on time. I mean, this is a common thing in a lot of West African militaries, I would say. And realistically, because Nigeria and Niger in particular had a real falling out when Niger had their coup d'etat, they just don't do anything with the Sahelian states. Other countries in ECOWAS, Ghana, Senegal, Togo, they've established relations with the Sahelian states. Although I'll say Ivory Coast has a very poor relation with Burkina Faso, and Benin does as well. But Nigeria doesn't have a good relationship with them at all. And you have a president in Nigeria who's just focused on politics and isn't really focused on defeating this. And in many ways, they had a previous president called Goodluck Jonathan. He was the man in charge when remember when all those girls were kidnapped about 2014? He was the president then.
Chibok.
Yeah, that's right. The Chibok girls. And he was seen as ineffectual. It took ages to get them back, and they didn't even get all of them back. He actually tried to approach the situation he was voted out because voters said he wasn't doing enough. But the current leadership with Tinubu in Nigeria now, I mean, it's not going to be tackled, and there's going to be no regional leadership. And I know by the end of this month there'll be another massacre in Nigeria. I mean, it's actually sadly guaranteed this is going to happen. Sorry to be such a down at that point, but it is probably one of the worst things I've. I mean, I haven't seen Nigeria be so chaotic in my lifetime in this way.
Mm.
I think you hit
Yeah.
on an important point for the whole entire region is there's no leadership in West Africa. And obviously the locals don't want the French to lead because of the history, so they bring in the Russians. And the Russians are
Mm.
not up to the job either. So local politicians and local leaders in West Africa, if they want this problem to stop, I see that they have to step up and actually do their job and lead. And Nigeria should be the leader, but they're not doing it. So I think this is why you have people like Troy who jump in and say, okay, I'm going to be the leader of this whole entire region. I'm going to step up and fight these guys and essentially stop terrorists and stop jihadists from moving in. But then again, there's nothing behind that. It's just empty words. And there's
Yeah,
no one that's really willing to step up and say, okay, I'm going to put my legacy on actually stopping the advancement of jihadism in the region. Until that
But
happens, I see the whole entire thing just continuing to just swirl downward.
I tend to agree, but again, I mean, I'm going to go back and beat my particular dead horse, which is the solution has to be economic. It can't be solely military. And this, I think, again, if you look at the rhetoric coming out of the Sahelian states, a lot of it are things that I basically go, yeah, these states should be self-sufficient. They should be looking to their own people for leadership. These are all things that are kind of self-evident, but there's no plan in terms of dealing with the threat of jihadism or extremism beyond let's hit these guys before they can hit us.
yeah.
And let's hit them really hard so they don't hit us. There's no military strategy beyond this. If we look at Mali, if we look at Burkina, if we look at Niger,
Or Nigeria. Yeah.
or Niger, actually, Nigeria is a pretty good case of this. There's no, we need jobs for farmers. We need to create a sense of ownership. Again, what you were talking about with Traore, yeah, there's a sense of, Pan-African fervor in Ouagadougou, but Ouagadougou's one city, and it's a rural region. Most people don't live in cities. Most people are living in the countryside. And to go back to one of the anecdotes you were talking about, I mean, when you say, she lost family members to the jihadist organizations, and then 10 years later, her kids are joining this organization. I mean, this is not something that these guys did because they were bored and they didn't have anything to do on a Saturday night. This is a life or death decision. If you don't have a job, how can you feed yourselves? How can you feed your family? And the problem is, until you address the fact that these organizations are often the only sources of meaningful employment in rural areas in West Africa, you are just not going to, you're never going to make inroads. Everything is going to be a temporary strategic victory that is going to be walked back in 5 years because the jihadists can offer employment and infrastructure, and the government has no interest in it.
Yeah. I would say that.
Sorry for the rant, but
No,
No,
that's
no, no,
I
no.
think it's 100% spot on. And you look at why Nigeria has become such a basket case, and a lot of it is due to the economy in northern Nigeria. You've had Lake Chad essentially dry up. Okay, you have Boko Haram terrorist groups coming in and going, okay, we're going to take advantage of the people here, and we're going to spread our extremism and our ideology through people who are essentially desperate. And they're taking advantage of people that essentially have no choice but to accept it. And they go, I'll do what I have to do to survive.
To give you to an example of like what the economic situation is like in some of these areas, the other economic activity which people do get into, if not, joining a jihadist group, is like illegal mining, right?
Hmm.
Like someone sets up an illegal gold mine and they just say, I need people to work in it. Is there any safety in these places? No. And many you always hear about a collapsed mine. You see it in Congo as well. Like mine collapses and like 50 people are buried underground. And I was reading a story about it, and like a guy was saying, the situation is so bad because no jobs. You're literally, they say, you hear stories. People come downstairs. Well, not downstairs because a lot of these houses are bungalows, but you'll go into your child's room and they're just gone. It's like they've just gone to the mine, and the mine could be like 50, 100 miles away even, but they've got friends who've done it and they just go. And so you get whole groups of youth, parts of the population of the town disappearing en masse, all to go find work. Some do that. Some get enticed to join these groups. Some try to get to Europe. You see what I mean? Like, it's just all of these are a tale of desperation. And if your options are, I can try and get to Europe, but I can die on the way. I can go work in a gold mine, but I could die in there. And I can join a jihadist group, I might die. But you see what I mean? Like the danger levels, it's not actually that different compared to what some of the others can be. And at least with that one, you'll actually stay quite local compared
Yeah.
to some of
Well,
the
and
others.
you're going to have some sort of food. You're going to have some sort of sustenance to survive. I mean, people working in mines, they're making pennies and they're working 14, 16 hours a day with, like you were saying, there's virtually
Yeah,
no resources to actually help them
but
pay
they
for
can make okay money, but it can be like you're doing like a 15-hour shift, you know.
it. Hmm.
So it's like, yeah, you can make money, but yeah, the pay is bad for what we would consider quite bad, but for them it can be pretty good because unfortunately, what do a lot of the anecdotes say when they talk to their kids who have phones and can see life? They're like, I don't want to be a farmer and grow yams. That isn't going to be my
Yeah.
life. I want more than this. I want more than this. I want to buy the new iPhone. I want to travel. I want to do this. And selling yam, I ain't going nowhere. It's a brutal truth. And so, it's things like these. You like maybe it's like the government has to have a real. I mean, I know it's not very sexy what I'm about to say, but like one thing that it really I find really interesting is what is the grand agricultural policy of these countries? You know, if you're going to grow yams,
Isn't
okay,
one.
but should it just be subsistence farmers, or should it just be having like proper state farms and they grow it en masse, and then
Hmm.
nearby you have your processing plant? These are the things which can bring a country forward. And it's like, okay, you don't need lots of people doing subsistence, but you need some people in the factory, you need some people to farm. If you have tractors, if you have some new technology, you don't need these things. But that's not sexy, and especially military leaders, many of whom are not that well versed in agricultural policy, they're never going to come up with this. Albeit the people beforehand who weren't military men didn't come up with this either. I'm not saying this is a panacea, but these are the sort of questions of the country you need to have to be like, what are our people going to do? If we're going to grow our food, how are we growing it? Not like this. But yeah, I mean, the youth of this generation, 20 years ago, a lot of them did still want to farm because when Gavin and I went to university, which wasn't 20 years ago, but it's not too far off
To
that
be
now.
clear, to be clear,
What was the migration route from Africa? The like irregular migration route
hmm,
from West Africa to Europe. It was very low, right? You didn't have masses of
yeah.
people trying to cross the Sahara, the Mediterranean to go to Europe. No, it was very like obviously you get people coming to do study, but not like that. People were. I'm not saying they were happy to farm, but it wasn't seen as a that's a death sentence like it is now. So there's a real shift of mentality,
Well,
and the
I
jihadists
think
pick on that.
well, because it's a really good recruitment strategy, to be fair to them. I mean, I think there are two things going on, which one, you're absolutely correct, because we're all connected. We can all see what everyone else is doing. And people are looking at their lives and they're going, this sucks. I'm selling yams by the side of the road. I don't have running water. I don't have electricity. I'm living in a hut. This is not what I want. I want something more. The other thing, which we're kind of alluding to in all of this, is demographic pressure. There were a lot more people than there used to be 20 years ago,
Yes.
and
especially
continues
younger people.
growing, especially younger people. And I mean, just to go back to it, but Niger, I think, has the highest rate of population growth on the planet, or it's in the top five, anyways.
Got the highest birth rate in the
It's
world.
the
You know that.
highest birth rate. It's
Yeah.
the highest birth rate. You're talking something like 7.2 to 7.8
I think it was like
births
8
per.
per woman.
It's
Yeah.
really high.
Mm.
So when you have that pressure, I definitely saw this when I was there. I mean, unemployment's always been an issue, but as you have a new generation coming up, it's gone from jobs are hard to find to there are no jobs. There are no jobs. If there are jobs, they're going to be informal. The pay is going to be almost non-existent. These are still, I mean, it's changing, but these are very traditionalistic societies. The expectation is you get married, you have a lot of kids. Well, now you're in a situation where this generation literally can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
And, it's not like the cost of living is impossible. It's because there's literally no work and there's no money.
Well,
Yeah.
just to
Um,
put together what you guys were both saying, I mean, they don't have an industrial policy, from what it sounds like, across ECOWAS. The countries themselves don't have an industrial policy that's going to attract investment. They don't have the resources to sustain an education system for these younger people that are growing up in this country, but they still have access to the internet. They can still see what's going on in other countries within the region and in other parts of the world on Instagram or on Facebook or on anything online, YouTube,
WhatsApp.
WhatsApp. Exactly. They
But
they
it's
know
not.
what's going on.
It's even
And
just their cousin is in America and is telling them how red it is.
yeah,
It
yeah,
can be
yeah.
simple as that.
Yeah, and they get access to all of this information that other generations have never had, and maybe the other generations don't even know exist or don't know how to use, and it plants a seed in their mind, and they go, I can do something that's more than just selling yams. And the country is looking at it and going, well, you've sold yams. Maybe you haven't sold yams, but your father sold yams and your grandfather sold yams, and you should just sell yams because that's just what we do. But
Yeah.
you have this disconnect within the country societally where I don't want to sell yams anymore. So the country should look at this and go, okay, rather than having these guys sell yams, you might need some people that sell yams, but what if we actually process these? What if we create some sort of an industry to where we can create value from these yams instead of just exporting them as yams, turn them into chips
So,
and sell the chips
so
to somebody else or set up a plastic manufacturing facility to make bags or whatever you're trying to do and
so Gavin, I
increase the
think we've
economy
made
and the standard of living across the board.
So, Gavin, I think we've made our first date into a Pan African right here. I'm proud to see it. Let me give you an example of where this has, how shall I put it? Many African governments have tried to do this and it's failed for various reasons. Doesn't mean they can't keep trying. But, for example, Ghana's previous government had a policy called One District, One Factory, which basically translated to every constituency in Ghana was to get a factory, right? It's going to be public-private partnership and yeah, to spur industrialization. That government's no longer in office. Why? It was a disaster. Why was it a disaster? Because they didn't plan it well. If I was to say, let's say, Dave, where you live, all right, we're going to have a pineapple farm. Okay. And then you go, so where's the pineapple processing factory to make into juice? Is it the constituency next door? No, it's 15 constituencies over that way. So you've got to send your stuff to me over terrible roads. Your stuff doesn't arrive on time half the time, so half the stuff has to be thrown away, right? Then I process it there, and then it's all right. So where's the market? Oh, actually, the nearest big city where we can sell all of this stuff is also like 80 miles in that direction. So it ends up becoming like the supply chains logistics is
Yeah.
never pulled through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, this doesn't work. And I think people forget how awful the infrastructure is. Like, the roads are so bad. To have like a big lorry with lots of produce, it's difficult to get around. And it ended up becoming like, you know, government cronies were getting contracts to set up factories, which by the end of their time in government, many factories were not operating or operating on the skeleton crew. So yeah, they can come in like, hey, we're making stuff, but they're making 20% of the capacity they should be making. So obviously not making money. So I think sometimes the industrial policy gets hijacked by corruption, which ruins it. Or Ghana's very first president, Kwame Nkrumah, had a very ambitious, we need to make things in Ghana, tomato processing factories, etc., etc. You can have the situation where I've said where things are not placed well. It can also be when you try to get the state to do it's just completely uneconomical, and you end up having factories which are losing the country money actually, and it's very difficult to, you have in any country as well where it's like you're subsidizing an industry which is completely uneconomical. Africa ended up with a lot of these. So it ends up being, okay, yes, we make this, but it's actually really expensive and we've got like imports which are cheaper and people prefer that. So there we are. Economically, there's like a lot of things which make it quite difficult to have. Like Ghana's trying to do it again, but in a different way. But I mean, trust me, what you've just said, every one who focuses on Africa and has a degree of economics throws up their hands and say, why hasn't this happened? And the answer is they have tried, they've usually tried it, it's not worked. Doesn't mean they can't try it, but unfortunately now the consequences of not doing this are catching up with them. And that's the thing you're really starting to see where, as I said, there's no jobs. And I think what Gavin was saying as well, people saying, I've got no money. That story about people running off to do gold mining, they were saying, my friend from school, he disappeared for 2 years. He comes back with enough money to buy a plot of land and build his house. That man's going to get married. The guy sits at home. No one's interested in him because I think when it comes to relationships, there's also a problem that for women, if you're going to get married, you want to marry a man who can look after you. You look at all the local men, they ain't looking after you, right? So they're leaving to go to the cities to find a man who's got not to find a man who can look after them all the time, but because if they're going to find someone who could potentially look after them, you're going to have to move out of your, rumbleding town, right? So for the men there too, it's just like the women are going, and even the ones who are around, I ain't making anything they're interested in. So, and we've all been young men. It's just, what do you do? I left my little town in Hampshire and moved to London. Gavin goes all over the world. Dave, I'm not sure about your situation. I'm sure you face a similar situation in your life. You go where the opportunities are. And I just think for the previous generation, if you grew yams, you could just save up money. The land was cheap as anything because there was so much of it. There wasn't, the country was very underpopulated. So the idea was you could just have not a particularly high income and still have your small house, have a wife, have a few children, and life just was, I'm not saying it was brilliant, but it's like, yeah, you could just manage, and everyone else was kind of doing the same. Expectations are now not set to the reality of where they live. And I think that is the brutal truth, and no African leader wants to admit it. And the African leaders can't admit it because when they talk to their own children who have gone to university in the US or UK and have loads of money, they're like, I don't know what these people are talking about, Me and all my friends, life's good, right? Because they're the elite. So they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, and this was always my experience in Niger was the elites in Niamey were essentially living in a different planet. They had family in maybe 5 or 6 regional towns spread throughout the country that were big commercial hubs. They had connections to local elites through chieftaincies and such. But they rarely went to those towns and they never spent a lot of time in them. They spent most of the time in the city, flying into Europe or the US. And that was kind of it. Again, this is a totally rural country. Something like 90% of the population lives on a farm. So when you're going, oh, things are going great for us, which I think was the attitude of the elite before the coup, for the last coup anyways, it was, well, things are going well for you. That's nice. But for 98% of the population, they're about to join Boko Haram because they can't buy yams.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
this is hyperbolic, but it's not that far off in parts of the country.
I also, so another anecdote I'll say, when I lived in Ghana, one thing I found quite odd, because I was in like the capital city and nearby, but obviously because I was there for a long time, I did a lot of domestic tourism. And I worked in a think tank, right? So I'm middle class Ghanaians, obviously working there. I think what shocked me was you realize these are middle class people in the capital city. Their knowledge of their own country, I wouldn't say knowledge, but their experience of it is very small. That they don't do domestic tourism, a lot of them. Because when I'll say to them, I went to this place, they'll be like, why'd you go there? Do you have family there? I was like, no. They're like, do we go to a funeral? I was like, no. They're like, why are you going? I'm just traveling. That kind of, they were like, but why? What's the point? And the idea is, like, people in the Accra, they are really unaware, and these weren't even elite people. They're very unaware of what's going on in the rest of the country. Because unless they
Mm.
have family or direct connection, the idea that you'll go somewhere just didn't occur to them. So I would say to them, oh, I'll say to them, you should travel more. You should go to Togo. One of them said to me, why would I go to a country which is poorer than Ghana? Full stop. I was like,
Honest.
I hadn't even thought of it like that. And they're like, I have no interest in going there. It's like, if I'm going to leave the country, I'm going to somewhere developed. Otherwise, it's just a complete waste of my time. And they have that same mentality in their own country, which is, I'm in a poor country. I'm in the rich part of that country. What benefits do I get by visiting that poor impoverished place? Zero. So I'm not going
Mm.
there. And then when you realize that's how, I'm not saying that every African thinks like that, but when a segment of the middle class thinks about that about their own country, think of the people who make it into the civil service and politics in those countries. It is, amplified, I think, of like,
Mm.
so, the thing I find quite sad with some of these countries, and you can put it in the Sahel, I'll try and link at the Sahel states in a bit, is this. I always say to some of these people, when you have African elites, if you let them have everything they want, your capital city will look like Dubai, but the rest of the country will look like Somalia. And in the Sahel, I think that's essentially what the people before were doing,
Yeah.
and that's that's happened. And so this is why these military leaders are popular because they're not from the same elite structures. If you're a colonel in the military, how should I put it? No one if you ever met an African elite, they don't want to be a colonel in their own military, right? They want to live in a penthouse apartment in New York. Okay, so it's a very different sector of society. So when these people take over, people say now they understand what we're going through much better than everyone else. Unfortunately, once you end up in a position of power in an African country, you are very quickly insulated from what's happening. And I think that is what's starting to happen because you're having men who beforehand were only really their nice things with like being in the officers' barracks and stuff like that. Suddenly are having Russians and being flown to Moscow and doing all these big things. They're quickly, I think, getting enamored with this kind of stuff and kind of forgetting that it doesn't matter if Putin says to you, I'm going to fix it for you. And they're like, oh, okay, it's going to be fixed. Is that actually going to translate on the ground to your farmer of yams? How is he going to be impacted by that? And I think that's the real difficulty of some of these societies, the connections and I'll say the barriers between the classes are so vast. I mean, we can't even imagine. It'll
Mm.
be like you and Elon Musk hanging out. What are you going to talk about? I mean, your life is so different, and I think that's what they have there.
Well, I mean, I don't know about Dave, but I think my life is pretty different. Yeah,
You could say that.
that's we could say that. I think that's a good place to end. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, and
we I could keep this going, but I think this is a really good place to end it.
I I think it is because I think what you just hit on is something we've been talking about the whole time, which is it's the divisions in these countries that are really preventing them from moving forward. not just militarily, but I just think in a lot of ways, but particularly economically. And I'm glad we've kind of had this great elliptical conversation,
Mm.
because I think it's hopefully, it will give people a very holistic view of kind of where things stand at the moment.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But it's
And
been a
I want to
pleasure.
add one more quick point.
Sure.
So if listeners are not really familiar with why these countries have such a stark divide, look at their history.
Mm.
Mm.
Look at the history of late 19th, early 20th century French colonialism in West Africa, and then get back to me. But we're going to have a pop quiz next week. There's going to be 25 multiple choice questions and a short essay.
I want to
And
use ChatGPT for the essay. Is that okay?
it's going to be handwritten, Dave, and I will be taking marks away for spelling and punctuation.
Ouch. I couldn't spell spelling bee on my resume, so
I don't know why you outed yourself like that.
I think it's funny.
It is funny. He asked me to look at his CV, and I'm like, well, what do you want me to say? I'm like, this is a pretty good CV.
Mm.
But you misspelled spelling bee on page 2.
Oof.
Like, otherwise, very good,
Yeah.
but small issue. Anyways, thank you so much for being on here today, Stuart. It's always a pleasure having you on The Fringe.
Thank
And
you.
just appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks again, as always.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome,
All right.
man. Talk soon.
Gavin,
He's
magic
left.
words. Yeah, he's gone. I'm not hitting the button, Gavin. Oh, I found it. All right. Take care, man.